So welcome, Elke Schmidt. Elke is a member of our club and has been for quite some time, right? And so we'd love to hear from you today.
All right, well, I'm gonna share my screen here. And then actually, hold on one second. I'm gonna see if I can also have my notes at the same time, really testing all of my PowerPoint skills here. And so just as an introduction to this is that I visited Dubai in December, and my sister's been living there right now. And I was really surprised when she went ahead and was like, oh, while you're here, you can go ahead and visit the World's Fair. And I was like, what? World's Fair? So as I get this started, I'm curious if a few of you would like to unmute yourself and just tell me what you know of World's Fairs or what you would think of World's Fair, or if there's anything that comes to mind when you hear the term World's Fair. So if anybody's brave enough to share a little bit of their thoughts.
So a little fun fact, the St. Louis World Fair, that was the kind of the Meiji era, that Japan brought over a lot of their garden, their Japanese gardens and foliage and plants were really popular. So they sponsored a huge Japanese garden and to promote the businesses, exporting, garden materials. And St. Paul Japanese garden has some of those elements from the World's Fair in St. Paul, from that World's Fair from the turn of the century.
Oh, that's so cool. That's amazing.
Very good.
Anybody else know anything about World's Fairs?
My husband presented at the World Fair in Dubai last month.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
Also visited so he was in the American pavilion, right? And quickly looked at the Dutch pavilion for me. Very, very friendly of him to do that. So it's really about showcasing your country and the newest developments is what he told me. But I did not go with him and I did not learn a whole lot about it. He's not very much an extrovert. So
I'm curious, what did they present on? Like, what did he present on?
He presented on the benefits of U.S. corn products versus corn products from other countries.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Trade mission type of thing, right? So,
So cool. Any other thoughts that come up to mind for World's Fairs?
My family visited the Montreal World's Fair, I believe in 1968. I was a little younger than I am today, and I think my family spent more time on rides than they did at countries, but it was kind of interesting, I thought. My mother comes from Flushing, or came from Flushing, and of course, right next door in Flushing Meadows was the New York World's Fair, some of which still remains there, the large globe and all from that. The Swedish entry into the, I believe, the 1898 World's Fair in St. Louis is now been moved to Central Park in New York City, and is now the Marionette Dollhouse. But that certainly is a Swedish-looking house from perhaps Dalarna province in Sweden. I certainly would recognize it. I was there my sister's 70th birthday. So that was 8 years ago, and was walking around, and there was a volunteer there. Big best saying, volunteer New York City, whatever it was. And turns out she was Swedish, and I had a Swedish conversation, or a conversation in Swedish that they're very interesting. And then I think Karen can tell us about the Norwegian entry to that same World's Fair. Karen, do you want to talk about that, or is she still here? She must not be here.
Well, you're muted, Karen.
I don't know about the Norwegian entry there. I can tell you that the Norwegian entry to the World's Fair in Chicago is up at Camp Ripley.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it is the Officers Club. The Norwegian government gifted it to the to the state of Minnesota, I believe. And so it is on the grounds of Camp Ripley, and it is an amazing building. It's so beautiful, and it's the Officers Club at Camp Ripley.
Wow. That's
For
really
those
cool.
who do not live in Minnesota, you must know what Camp Ripley is.
Camp Ripley is the National Guard training camp in central Minnesota.
Well, that's certainly a lot more than I knew when I heard the World's Fairs. So by the way, all images are from Google and me, but they're not all mine. So I was like, what? There are still World's Fairs. I just knew about them from like the Space Needle and then like Queen Victoria. And I kind of thought, okay, you know, they've kind of like fallen out of favor now that like there's all this international travel and there's a lot more ways for people to connect in different ways. But they're definitely still going on. So it's currently in Dubai. It's called the Expo 2020, but it had to be rescheduled for COVID. So it's there from 2020, fall 2021 through spring 2022. I believe it goes through at least March. So you definitely could still get there if you wanted to. You have a few more weeks. And so there's an international governing body. So as with many things, I heard about this and I was like, I'm just going to Google everything while I was late, you know, on my layovers and stuff on my way there to see what in the world my sister was getting me into. And so there's an international governing body and they do now World's Expos, which is this one, but there's also like specialized expos, horticultural expos, and the Milan Triennial is part of the expos. So there's quite a lot out there. And the World Expos now are on a 5-year schedule. And that was in part, there's some debate, but maybe to like help distinguish it from the Summer Olympics, because there were times where cities hosted both. And rather than helping each other, sometimes they detracted one from the other. So just looking to spread out the love a little bit. So World Expo started, you know, in the 1800s. And really up until World War II, they were seen as like industrialization. So they'd focus on trade and technology and innovations. And so, you know, the top photo is actually a picture of the first Japanese embassy delegation to the UK. And they visited the 1862 London World's Fair. And then the bottom picture is the Crystal Palace from the 1851 London's World's Fair. And that was like the crown jewel of the whole exposition. And it really was about showcasing, like at the beginning, all these technological innovations. I thought it was really interesting that Schweppes was the official sponsor of the first one in 1851. Apparently it's the world's first soft drink. And I didn't even know there was like corporate sponsorships of things in 1851. So consumerism goes way back. And then, so the elevator was debuted with a safety brake in 1853 at the New York World's Fair. And that was actually really what helped it become commonplace in a lot of buildings. So before that, there was a lot of misgivings about elevator safety. And then within a few months after that, the first passenger elevator was installed in a public building in New York. And refrigerator made ice, which I actually thought 1862 was pretty early for that. So I'm sure it was like a really big deal for everyone to see a refrigerator spout out some ice. So that's, I mean, except for the Space Needle, this is what I really, you know, expected of a World's Fair, which, you know, there was definitely some cool, innovative technologies on display, but it wasn't quite, you know, only focused on business and enterprise and technology when I was there. So it's kind of shifted over the years. So after World War II, real quick. So the first official Expo in the US was in 1876 in Philadelphia. There's, as we've seen, you know, a lot of the architecture is destroyed afterwards, but a fair amount of pieces do survive. And so, for example, Memorial Hall is now a Please Touch Me museum. So it was really cool to see photos of kids playing in the museum. And then each state had their own house, and the Ohio house is still standing. And I think it's still in Philadelphia. And what I thought was really interesting is they brought over the right arm and the torch from the Statue of Liberty while it was being built to raise money for the pedestal. So you could go up and get your foot, you know, like go up to the top and like look around. And I think they charged like 20 cents or something to go see it. But I think that's so random that you just see this giant arm with a torch, you know, and you can see in the daguerreotype or whatever this is that, you know, people are still pretty small. It's kind of rising above everything else. So I thought that was super odd and interesting. And then they also would use it to, like I said, a lot of technology. So like the cable for the Brooklyn Bridge was there, and Edison's telegraph system. Also ketchup, the first commercial ketchup, it was like a homemade item prior to this, but this is when Heinz debuted their ketchup. And popcorn and root beer, all of which I love. So I think the 1876 one was the one to be at. Then after this, we get into like this era of cultural exchange, which is actually what I thought was modern day expos, but actually it's kind of shifted since then. So this is where we got the Space Needle. We also have Montreal hosted in Greg, what year was it? 1967? Is that right? Oh, he's on mute. But one of their buildings became the Montreal Casino. And then down at the bottom is the Unisphere, which is currently still part of, still on display in Queens. And that was part of the 1964 New York World's Fair. And so all of these fairs kind of were seen as a time of social, you know, social progress. You know, they'd have titles like The Dawn of Tomorrow and like The World We Dream of and things like that. And they were focused on space. The space race featured heavily in all of it. And interestingly enough, Montreal actually was so taken by their World's Fair and they loved it so much, they actually in 1968 named the Montreal Expos after the World's Fair. So I thought that was kind of odd. So, you know, you love an event so much, you associate so much of yourself with it that you want to name a sports team after it. And so, you know, it's interesting to see that like something like the Space Needle, which is now part of like any trip to Seattle, if nothing else, you can at least, you know, see it standing there. It was, you know, brand new at the time. It also makes me think of like the Eiffel Tower, which was in Paris at one of the World's Fairs. And so there's a lot of things that we just think of part of our lives or part of our architecture that we're all part of these World's Fairs. And so then one of the expos that I thought was really interesting that I ended up going through a giant like wormhole into Google about was the 1939 World's Fair. And so think about like 1939, all these people from all these different countries come to New York for the World's Fair. You're often based here for months. So it was planned from 1939 to 1940 for about 6 months. And then another 6 months later, they would restart for 1940 to 1941 for 6 months. And so in that, World War II started. And so some pavilions didn't reopen. I think in particular, Poland and Czechoslovakia didn't reopen for the following year. And then also there's interesting stories about people that couldn't return to Europe because of the unrest and the war. And so then they settled in New York or in the US. And there was a story about a chef, a famous French chef in New York, who actually had come for the Expo to like cook at the French Pavilion and ended up staying in New York because he couldn't go back to France. And so he ended up having this like famous French restaurant. So, you know, it's interesting how like you're here for an event, you think it's gonna be about 6 months, maybe 2 years, and then you just find that you can't go home. And so also the Magna Carta left Britain for the first time, probably since its signing, you know, I think it was signed technically in France or something, but left Britain, was hosted at the UK Pavilion, and then it ended up staying out the war until about 1947 at Fort Knox, right next to the American Constitution. So that too couldn't return home for quite a while, but it did eventually return home. So you think about like a World's Fair as this time of coming together, but then what that must have looked like in the discussions that must have been had during a time of war. And then I think it was Greg who mentioned all the games at World's Fairs or some of the amusement park rides. And so a lot of Coney Island actually were rides that were first featured at the World's Fair in 1939. And so, for example, this parachute jump apparently is still standing at Coney Island, but you cannot ride it. It's non-functional, which is probably to all of our benefit. I think it looks really fun, but also really scary, a parachute jump. So some of the things that were featured at the 1939 World's Fair were nylon, favorite of every businesswoman all the way, through the 1990s, mid 2000s, definitely probably fallen out of favor now during work from home. And then the Viewmaster, and then early televisions were a really big thing at the 1939 World's Fair. So they televised, they had like a film, they would record the opening speech and then they televised at the same time. And they had TVs that, you could act in front of and see yourself on screen. And to prove that it was real, they kept a lot of the housings in glass so you could see all the cables behind the TV to prove that it was real. And so, yeah, I'm sure that was crazy when it was first released. So now we're in the era of nation branding around World's Fairs. So it's really this idea of improving national image. You can tell I was going to actually type some more there, if that's okay. It's this idea that it would generate, you're going to a World's Fair to promote your country, to inspire tourism, to feature new technology, to feature new business opportunity in your country, to generate investment. And that the hope is that you'll get a return on your investment for the World's Fair. So either when you host it, it's quite expensive, or even hosting your own pavilion can be quite expensive. And so it's really this idea that you're going to find a return on your investment. These buildings are all featured from the 2000 Expo in Hanover. So the flower one is Venezuela. The staircases are the Netherlands. And then the whale is actually the Pavilion of Hope. And so, and I found this in Dubai too. There were like a few main pavilions that were hosted by the hosting country, and they focused around a theme. So rather than being focused on a country, they're focused on theme. And so Hanover featured one on hope. And so I thought this was really weird. Or interesting. So Germany hosted it, but the Dutch pavilion, so this staircase cost 35 million to build and host, but it's estimated that it generated 350 million of potential revenues for the Dutch economy. And so this idea that like going and promoting your work as a country and what you can do for partnerships and your business and your tourism is that it really can have like a huge return on investment. I couldn't believe that. So you're like, an estimated minimum 10 times return on your investment, which is much better than, playing the lottery, maybe investing in some treasury bonds. And so it seems like a good way to help your country out. So that's kind of where we are now, which gets me to Dubai. So this is the Dubai Expo. Dubai was really proud because they put together a fund to help support countries who typically wouldn't have the money to do a pavilion. And so every country had their own pavilion. I believe there were only maybe 4 countries that were not featured at the Expo, but most countries had their own pavilion, including Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, even with the turmoil of the Taliban in August, they were still able to do a pavilion because they worked with an Afghan man whose father had been an antiques dealer, and he had all of these antiques from Afghanistan. And so everything that you saw in the Afghanistan pavilion was actually objects that had been taken out of the country prior to the Taliban. And actually, I think like back in the 1980s or 70s. So that was pretty interesting. At each entrance, you'd see flags of all the represented nations. all of the main walkways have these like massive, like mushroom shape umbrellas that create really beautiful walkways. And these cute little robots walking around to greet you. And then the main pavilion, the main center, everything kind of gathered in the center around Al-Wazl Plaza, which is what we see on the right, which had then a light show. So you actually had like a massive seating area down to a bowl underneath. And then up above was this massive arch, and they do light shows. Alicia Keys was there one night. I saw the Sheikh of Saudi Arabia come through with his entourage. It was one of those where I saw a bunch of people gathering and they looked really excited. So I just joined them. And then I saw some people walk by and they're like, oh my God, that's him, that's him. So I didn't really know who I was looking at. So that's an introduction. So some of the really cool architecture. So each pavilion was really an opportunity for the country to make their mark, whether that's something that they wanted to tell more about their country, they wanted to promote new technology, they wanted to make a statement, they wanted to engage in one of the themes. That was really, what these buildings each presented. So I'll be right back. I forgot, I wanted to show you a quick map, but meanwhile, I'll take a look at the 3 photos. I'm also going to turn on a light. So I have this, you have like a massive map. As you can see, I folded it many times each day. And you'd have this massive map, and each section had a theme. And so depending where you were, you could either be in opportunity, mobility, or sustainability. Those are the 3 themes of the Expo. And oftentimes countries might fit their building to be in that theme, or they would focus on something that they really wanted to promote from their own country. So on the left is the Singapore building. This was my favorite. They also had really good snacks on the top floor. So that was really nice. And they did a living structure. So it was a series of cones kind of stacked one on the other like this, and they were covered in plants. They had a live orchid wall, they had a water feature, they had mist, they had plants, and really it was a self-sustaining system. So they actually had data about like what little water they needed because it was just recycling itself, which was pretty amazing in a place like Dubai. Austria was another one of my favorites. For those that don't know, I studied abroad in Austria. Might not talk about it all the time, but they went instead with a building that just drew from existing technologies in the UAE, which actually drew from traditional building structures that use natural airflow to cool the building. So it was actually one of the most calming buildings at the whole Expo, which is this chaotic environment. So many people, so many lights, sounds, all these other buildings had light displays and robots, which are all really cool, but you come to this place and it's just quiet. It was clay, it was cool. The wood was the softest wood ever. So actually in this photo in the middle, that bottom was a bowl that kind of swooped down into the center. And it was this wood that they use in saunas. And it was the softest wood I've ever touched. It felt like a blanket. I can't explain it. It was so soft. And my sister and I just laid in the middle of the bowl, and I think we definitely fell asleep for 10 minutes. It was the best. So that was one approach, is kind of focusing on sustainability and really trying to let the building speak for itself with not a lot of additional displays or technology or audio sensory input, except what's coming from the building itself. Conversely, you also have somewhere like Russia. So this was in the Russia building. And on the left is a picture of the robot ballet. So you have these 2 robot arms, and they did this really beautiful ballet around each other and came in and morphed around. And it was really pretty. It was really cool. They seemed almost like they had a soul. It was really odd. And then on the right is this massive cranium with the nervous system, and it focused on the brain and kind of the power of the human brain and AI and how it works with human brain. And so they had light projections on it. They had like a voiceover, kind of like a, you'd think of like a astronomy show or astronomy show at a planetarium, for example, but with a brain. So that was really cool as well. Huge sensory overload here though. It was crazy. So then after this, you can go to the Austria booth at the Singapore Pavilion and just be, which was really nice. And Russia's really was about kind of their technological investment and like what you could do by working with them and how, you know, what amazing things they were able to do with technology. And if you know, I think that was really one of those where they were really promoting investment in Russia and working with Russian companies. So then you also had a lot of other technology. And so I'll start with the one on the right, actually. So you can see my last name Schmidt there. So we all got badges and you'd put your name in. And then as you walked around the exhibit, it would pop your name up places. And so you could really see how you're interacting with the exhibit. And then at the end, we all got to ride swings, which is what you see them sitting on. And then on the left, though, was one of my, I would say my top 5, which is the UK Pavilion. And this was the primary exhibit. And you'd actually wind your way up some stairs kind of on each level. And you'd go into the center of this big orb. And there you'd put in a word. You'd choose a word that meant something to you. And you put it into this little iPad. And then they had an AI system that would take that one word and create a line of prose. And then they would tie all of these lines of prose together and display on the front of the building. And so it was demonstrating AI, but it was also looking at kind of each visitor as a single entity coming together to create a whole that's supported by AI. And so they did have some rules. You couldn't use words associated with like specific faiths, or you couldn't use words that would deem vulgar, for example, but they really otherwise let you choose your own words. And it was interesting to see as people were, you know, coming out of the exhibit, them talking about what words they chose and what they meant to them. So then I'm hoping these videos work. So these were in the main pavilion. And you can kind of see this is on the ceiling, and we each wrote a sentence of what we were committing to do for the earth and the theme of sustainability. And then have our little phrase go through the river in the ceiling, and the sky would shift. And it was almost like looking at a reverse Amazon rainforest. And so you'd be in these big comfy chairs, just staring up at the ceiling and trying to trace your phrase and looking at somebody else's phrase and what you were committing to do for the earth. And then you can see it would shift and be another scape. This is more like during the day, I guess. And so this would just cycle through. And some people would, you know, sit here for maybe an hour just looking, and other people would just walk through and say, okay, that was great, thanks. And then this is a video from the exhibit with the swings. And so the focus was really on coming together to power these orbs. So as we began swinging as a group, these balls would raise and lower based on our energy. And they're actually using the movement of the swings to power the space. Oops. No, there we go. So then other exhibits focused more on technology and different approaches and to highlight different various social issues. So for example, I think this is the Netherlands on the left, and in the middle, we were each given an umbrella, and they projected their video on top of the umbrella. So you'd actually look up and see the video above you. And then the building itself, the walls were made out of mushrooms, and it also was self-sustaining in terms of the environment. So it was very moist, it was very cool, it was very comfortable. And that was because of the mushrooms and the way that the building was created. It's also like a more of like a dome type that came to one ventilation point. And then alternatively, you know, that was a very like intuitive, maybe like natural way of looking at our use with water. And then you alternatively had a very like tech-driven, engaging, more game space around how we consume different things in our lives. And they had a lot of moving pieces in this hall. They had a lot of noise, a lot of machines, and a lot of interactive things where you had to like choose either, I would prefer to, you know, do this, or I would prefer to do that with the same, you know, what's going to have the larger effect on your carbon footprint, for example. Another big theme was collaboration and generating creativity through fun and having fun. So the Yellow Ball Pit was in Germany, and theirs was the top exhibit for everybody because they always had like the longest lines, and it's because you just got to go in and be a kid. So they had this massive ball pit that you could jump in. And the idea was that each of the yellow balls symbolized one idea from one person, and that you would all come together. And through that, you'd be able to kind of brainstorm and combine your ideas and pick through and select, you know, a few really great ideas that would have a sizable effect. And then in the middle is Luxembourg. They had a very like self-promotion type exhibit about why you should go invest in Luxembourg, and a video from the Duke of Luxembourg and all this. And then it culminated with a slide. I couldn't believe it. It was like, we're all fancy and we have all these amazing things should come and invest in our companies. And here I am wearing a tie telling you about all of the like money you can make. And then it was like, and go have fun. So I thought that was a nice like dichotomy of the two different sides. And then Japan, they had quite a lot of different exhibits, but one of my favorites was they had scenes. I wish I could remember the Japanese word, but it's a specific art form in Japan that takes everyday objects and creates scenes out of them. And so, for example, you have islands of peanut shells with little people rowing peanut nut shell boats. And they had ones of like a corn on the cob that became a spaceship, and bed linens that became sand dunes, things like that. So I really liked that. And I thought it was just super fun and comical. And so then kind of on the tourism side, you have two examples, one from the Seychelles, where they had treasure hunts through their exhibit. So it featured all the different things you can do in the Seychelles as a tourist. And you gotta go around and find all of these different clues. And then if I remember right, I think the treasure was ultimately just the like paradise of the Seychelles. So that if you ever want a treasure, you just need a trip to the Seychelles. That's treasure enough for anyone. And then Saudi Arabia, massive exhibit, massive building, huge. They had this like tilted building, and underneath was this massive video screen with all these individual screens, and they would project, either it would be like a mirror and reflecting up what they saw below it, or it'd be an image of a beautiful landscape in Saudi Arabia, or it'd be a video of different people of Saudi Arabia coming together to create one picture. And then on the side, you can read some almost like slogans of, you know, like what you can do or why you should go to Saudi Arabia or work there or live there. discover our nation and society, discover opportunities, discover our nature. And it really just rose up above all of these other buildings next to it. It was kind of standing out from others because it wasn't in like a row of buildings. It was kind of by itself, and it just kind of rose up as this like massive, like almost like Pride Rock. You can imagine like Simba and Rafiki on top. And then in the exhibit, it was really awesome. They had this really like all-encompassing video scape of different scenery in Saudi Arabia. And so on the walls, you would have this beautiful landscape, 360-degree view. And then in the bowl is actually like a bird's eye view of the same landscape. And so you looked like you were somehow like floating through this landscape where everywhere you looked in front of you and below you was this beautiful image. And they would have, it was all live, it was all video. So you'd see like herds of animals running or a river flowing. And so it was really, really beautiful. And this is one of the times I saw adults the most captivated. They would, I mean, the kids sometimes would kind of tire, but adults would just be like, no, 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 I want to see one more. I want to see one more. I want to see one more. And so it was really fun. It was really impressive. And then at the end, here's just like a culmination of lots of different buildings that were there. So top left is also from Saudi Arabia. They have this massive globe. You can kind of see like just how tall people are in comparison. And it was this massive globe. And then it had all these mirrors around it. So you just be surrounded by these different images on the globe. Top middle is Pakistan. It was so pretty. It was so rainbow and sparkled, and it just shone in the light. It was beautiful. Lots of like IG, selfies in front of it, I have to say, trying to get the perfect look. So yeah, it was really funny. And you'd have all these like different people being like, oh, can you take one of me? Oh, from this side. And then top right, Oman. Bottom left is Spain. Their exhibit tried to emulate spice mounds that you'd see in like a bazaar or a souk. Brazil, I couldn't help but throw that in. And then, so Brazil was really cool. So they had this building on stilts, but then at the bottom of the building is a thin layer of water. And then they had different exhibits each week. So the week prior was a bunch of hammocks floating over the river. So you'd have to like walk through the water and then you could go lay in the hammock. My sister, I think, went and spent like 3 hours there in a hammock. And then the next week, someone here like Stephanie or Christina, someone might know what this is. It's a community that lives in houses on stilts that are really brightly colored houses. They like might live in like on a river or near the ocean or something. No. Okay. Yeah. So it featured this one community and it had like stories from that community. And then on the bottom right is also Saudi Arabia. So they had this like really interesting, you can kind of see in the back, it's a water feature. So it's cascading water. And then depending on where they cut the droplets off, it would create shapes. They also sometimes would try to create words, and that was a little harder to read. I also don't read Arabic. So I definitely didn't understand, but I really like the geometric shapes. I thought that was really like bewitching. I think this might be the end. Yep. So that's my quick overview. So questions, thoughts, comments, happy to go back to any photos. If you need all of my Instagram pictures in front of the Rainbow Building, I can send them your way. All right, Chrisanne.
So how many days did you spend there? Because that's a ton to see.
Oh yeah, so I forgot to mention, so you could get like a little passport and get a stamp from each country. And I mean, it is massive. I spent, let's see, I was there for about a week, and I think I went there 4 days, and maybe of the 4, it would usually go for like 5 hours at a time. So I spent like 20 hours, and I only saw, I would say, like a fourth of it, not even.
Wow. Yeah. Did you have to pay for each day independently?
No, you could, you got like a pass. So, because, so you could buy like a month pass that ended up being like, I think less than the cost for 3 days. And then I would just do that because then you can just go as often as you want. It might have even been less. I think it might have been less, like even 2 days. So yeah, it was, you just go in, and then you did have to show a vaccination card or a PCR test to go in, and then you have to show your pass, and then you could do like a fast track pass for some of the buildings. But then it was interesting because as I got further into the busy season around the holidays, less and less countries would do the fast track pass. So like my first day there, I could do a fast track pass for a bunch of them and just kind of line them up and try to, like, Disney World, you plan it out and everything. And then by the end, I would just go wait in line for 2 hours for Germany because I really wanted to go play in the ball pit. And then they have food there. So a lot of the pavilions had a restaurant with, real food from that country, with oftentimes a chef that was flown in. They would also have like cultural exhibits, dancing, art, demonstrations of different sorts. There were a few like really big events. So they had, Alicia Keys was there one night. They had a fireworks display, like a really, really big one. And they also had fireworks, I think, most every night, actually. China would put on a drone show every night, which, like, imagine fireworks that behave in ways that you want them to. And then they like made all the drones make shapes in the sky. And it was really funny because they spelled out their sponsors. So you just like have drones do like a fancy dance and then spell it Samsung or something. And then they would like do another dance and like spend out. So imagine like 1851, they spell it Schweppes or whatever the deal was.
So Elke,
Yeah, Jane, yeah.
I think of, Dubai is one of the more progressive of the Arab states, but it's still Arab. So I'm wondering, like, who were the attendees, and especially of the women who attended, were they like, if they were Arab, were they covered up or,
Yeah, so oftentimes it was pretty apparent who was Arab and who was not, because it oftentimes came down to dress, or at least if you're Emirati or not. So the women would wear long black robes, have their face covered, and the men would wear long white robes with a turban or a hat, depending, I think. And then the rest of us, though, like, I tend to try to be more conservative in how I dress when I'm in somewhere new where I know that might not be how people of that area dress. But, you definitely would see people in like short shorts and they seem to be treated fine. And Jessica said, so in the UAE, it's really interesting. So all Emirati people receive a stipend from the government and are promised a job. So because of that, a lot of Emirati people had a job at the Expo, but also they have a fairly secure income. And so they were fully able to participate in the Expo. You see a lot of families there. They'd be at the restaurants. They'd also be taking the photos in front of the really pretty, beautiful rainbow building. But you also wouldn't see like a man, Jane, this, but you wouldn't see like a man like hugging a woman and, or anything like that in the photos. And so, yeah, that was actually one thing I really appreciated, was I felt like I saw oftentimes at least a third of the people there were Emirati or Arab, which I really enjoyed. Dubai does have really extreme economic divide. So immigrant laborers do not make a lot of money. And so, for example, all the taxi drivers in Dubai got a free pass to the Expo. The taxi drivers I talked to, all of them said, I don't got time to go. I got to make money. I'm just going to go, and it's going to cost money to eat there. It's going to cost money to do this and that. Maybe one day at the end, I'll go and we'll just like pack a lunch and just go and look at things, so there's definitely some class divide there. And so I didn't get the impression that I was seeing a lot of people who live and work in Dubai, but are not Emirati and are not Western. Karen.
What is your sister doing in Dubai?
So she's teaching kindergarten at the American school. So it's like your normal kindergarten class. Although she says their system, kindergarten, they're definitely not, there's no expectation that all of our kids, for example, are reading by the end of kindergarten, which is the difference that she found then here at her, when she taught in Minnesota. But yeah, so she's teaching, this is her second year. She signed on for a third year. She loves visitors. So anybody who wants to go to Dubai, you have somewhere to stay, she would love to host you. I'm saying this, I know, like live on Facebook, but definitely to people here in the Zoom room with me. So she doesn't get mad at me. She loves it. She does recognize some of the like socioeconomic issues in Dubai and some of the inequality and inequity in the country, but she also Dubai is a really fun place. She, when I visited her, we also did like a yacht party in the marina, and I got to go swimming on a giant flamingo floaty in front of the Burj Al Arab, which is the building that looks like a sailboat that Tiger Woods shot off the top. I saw the Palm, which is like this man-made island. There's islands that are like made to look like different countries. So she'll be like, hey, I'm on Canada today, and she's actually just on an island with a beach. She goes, hiking in the Wadi, which are these ravines. So she really loves it. And, you don't pay income tax, so you get a little extra spending money. Yeah, because she's there full time, so she doesn't have to pay US income tax, and then Dubai doesn't have income tax. So you can save a lot of money. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
so
Paige.
I don't mean to cut it very short, but at the same time, I do want to respect your schedules. And so how about we close our meeting and wrap it up? And then if someone wants to stay on, I don't know, Elke, if you have time to stay.
Yeah, I have time. Yeah.
All right. I think that'd be maybe one solution, because we have so many questions. This was super, super fascinating. I took a lot of notes. I learned so much, Elke.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Let's give Elke a big round of applause here. And let's stick to our tradition of reciting the four-way test. If Kirk can maybe share the four-way test. Do you have it on your screen? Well, this is fantastic. I have a question. How about we also recite the whole thing? So the four-way test, everything. How about that? Instead of just the four tests itself. How do you think about that? You want to join me in reciting the whole thing?
Sure.
All right. Well, I don't know if we have to say Rotary, but the four-way
test
of
the
things we think, say, or do.
Is it the truth?
Is it the truth? Second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third,
Will
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
friendships. Fourth,
Will it be
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Yay! I know there are choirs that work through Zoom, and I'll have to ask my colleague at SMSU who runs the choir there how he does this.
They record them all separately.
Maybe, I don't know, but it is fantastic. Thank you all, and please, for all of those who'd like to stay on, if Kirk can.
I'll stick around if folks have questions, but thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elke. Hey, Paige, so good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone.